Yes, people, welcome back to the 59th episode of the Backpacking Psychonaut. In today's episode, we've got a very special guest. So, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Yeah, happy to be here, brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to enlighten my viewers. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, well, social anxiety is a pretty compelling thing, right? It's a pretty, very challenging, I'll say, aspect of life, right? So yeah, if I can share anything that will be helpful to everyone, then that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think with social anxiety, I see like a severe lack of good content out there. And I think that's what made me gravitate towards you and to want to ask you to come on the show because it's very vulnerable. Your content is very honest and it is extremely helpful and
Hmm.
practical. So, before we get into some more of the practical tips, Sam, I wanted to ask you just about your own experience with social anxiety. Just like how has it affected your life? When did you think it started? And just your own day to day of how you deal with it.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I think social anxiety first emerged for me when I was going through some shifts. Like, I remember being a very happy, like, very popular kid actually in primary school. And interestingly, from what I've seen, this seems to be quite a trend. Is that there's a certain popularity that people experience, or maybe not. You know, some people are also on the other end of the spectrum where they're bullied and stuff. But for me, like, I was really open and yeah, I had a wonderful childhood basically. But then when I started hitting into puberty and this sort of thing, like when I was like 12, 13, 14, although I didn't have like the context for it at the time, but I definitely started noticing shifts in experience where like that, that, which is pretty, it's normal, right? So it's not to like hype this up as something dramatic or anything, but like, the insecurity started kicking in. But I know now through experience that as I evolved through high school, I started to notice like these insecurities start to form. And the way that I coped with that insecurity was by masking, basically. So like putting on a front is a really common thing. And what was actually happening at that time when I was in high school um, was there was a lot of probably anxious energy in the system at that time that I wasn't aware of, right? And at that time, when you're young, you're still trying to cope and you're still trying to fit into social groups. It's like that's one of our core motives at that time is to fit into social groups. So if you're feeling anxious, you're going to do whatever the path of least resistance is, which would be to put on a front or create a persona of some degree out of really from a place of lack in a way. So there's a lot of shame that comes with that too, right? So that this is where the shadow starts to form very significantly, the social shadow, because we're rejecting so much of ourselves, and this is what I did. You reject a lot of your experience in exchange for social validation. So if I can reject the anxious part or the part that doesn't fit into the social group, then the group will like me, and that becomes the basis of identity in a way, right? And that for me then carried on into adult life. And like I had a pretty successful front as well by all appearances. Like I was a school captain in school and in high school, and people liked and respected that part of me. But I remember like I would be doing these like big presentations of like as a school captain and stuff in front of 500 people, and people thought I was really confident, but I remember just feeling like a sack of shit underneath that. I was like really anxious, really, yeah, like it was almost like I could speak with people for a bit, but then the more that I spoke with them, and they would start seeing through the front, basically, or the perception that or the image I was trying to hold up in front of everyone was being, would be basically like threatened the more that they got to know me, which I think I've seen in people that can be quite common. So it's, yeah, and then I guess without going on for too much longer, I could go on about this, but yeah, like then that transitioned into every facet of my life, right? So I had a job. I went to university. I was still experiencing this at university, and just real strong, like Alex, really strong dissociative tendencies, right? Like being in social groups, and coping by recruitment of these coping strategies and stuff that I learned through high school and through university and earlier in life. And but being in these groups was still very challenging, right? Like at university, and I would distance myself, I would isolate myself, I would play video games for like 10 hours a day. That was my coping strategy, addiction. Like I was really fucking good at playing video games, so I was like number one in the world in Player Unknown's Battlegrounds, this like PUBG game that was really popular a couple of years ago. And like, man, yeah, so a lot of distractions that were my antidote to feel safe in my nervous system, to feel grounded. And it worked until it didn't. It like, so then I started doing spiritual practices like Vipassana meditation retreats, because I intuited that something was wrong, and a lot of men's work, a lot of men's psychology work. And I started to confront these things through the invitation of people like Jordan Peterson at the time, who like, go into the unknown, he would say. And I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm gonna go into the unknown. I need that fatherly advice. And yeah, so and then that started to help me then confront the social anxiety. But the interesting thing was, Alex, was that the more that I actually, as I did that, I confronted my inner demons, my psychology in these men's workshops. I was still distancing myself from the shame and the blame that I was putting on myself for being anxious. I remember being in these like men's circles, and like, yeah, I was like facing my demons, but I still had this sense of like, what is wrong with me? Like I'm so anxious in front of these people. And it was, yeah, and it took a lot of inner work and progression through deep meditation. Like I was doing 2 hours of meditation every day, and so much of this stuff was, and trying earnestly to bring this into daily life. And I was still being confronted with anxiety, despite my real strong attempts to, to integrate and to feel better. Yeah. And then what else can I add to that? Yeah, I think that it just continued, right? So even until recently, like these things still come up, social challenges can still come up. Although the capacity, the capacity to be with such experiences, and the understanding of what to do and how to orient as it's arising. And also that a big distinguishing thing that I've learned is that as sensitivity opens up through self-inquiry, through meditation practices, and through psychological work, what I've come to realize, and what other people have pointed to, and other teachers in this sort of thing, is that we experience we're not separate entities from other people. Yeah. One of the big things that we do with social anxiety is like we feel the social angst, and then we blame ourselves. We internalize shame and blame on ourselves. Like you experience the pain, you experience an emotional contraction, and then you instantly think, "Oh, this is me. Like God, what's wrong with me, basically, and I've got to make it stop." To see that clearly, to see those beliefs is key, because often people with social anxiety are quite sensitive people. Like as all humans are, we're all sensitive. Although we're in a culture where there's deep emotional repression, suppression, and numbing out to experience, distractions, porn, Netflix, all this shit, And we all numb ourselves out to our innate humanness. And the more that the socially anxious people tend to be, more on the sensitive side, where, and this has been my experience, that we feel the environment, and we're very good at attuning to the environment to gauge what's going on. And then we internalize a lot of that shame and blame on ourselves. Just like, and these are all innocent coping strategies, right? So again, somebody one of your viewers who might have social anxiety watching this, may have a sense of like, there's a certain like tabooness to it or something, right? It's like almost shameful maybe to maybe be listening to even such a podcast like this. And if that is the case for a viewer, then that is the shame speaking. And I think it's about meeting those energies with a lot of love and attention and deconstruction of beliefs. So you asked me, Alex, like how I relate to social anxiety. So Yeah, I mean, this sort of stuff, this conditioning is quite deep. It's quite strong. And there's another thing to be said about choosing that to be the case. We can actually, this is something that's been emergent for me as well, is choosing whether or not we want to buy into that anymore, right? Because there's a certain safety in that. Um, but yeah, so it still comes up. I meet it with a lot of love. I hold any energy that arises in my experience with as much love and acceptance as I can, because everything else in my experience hasn't really worked, right? All of the self-help, all of the trying to get rid of in order to feel better, it has a place, but I just see a lot of the social anxiety stuff and really any mental ailment as any mental fixation as energy now. And it's like, if you think about it in this way of it being a cross-generational child, right? That's like, because we inherit these coping strategies not just from our social environment, but also from our past generations. Previous generations have used the similar coping strategies, right? So when we're confronted with these energies of social anxiety, like, or whatever it is, right? If it doesn't just have to be social anxiety, it's like, for me, it's become about how much can I just meet that energy without blaming anyone, like, oh, they're making me socially anxious, without blaming them or anyone like that. How much can I then just meet these energies with such deep, unconditional love? And just breathe into them and give them space, as if they're a wounded child that's been kicked out and rejected and resisted through generation to generation to generation. How much can I then just meet that with love, and breathe into it, and that's and see what with skillful discernment, like, what am I resisting, what am I believing about myself, and just be radically sincere and authentic, and don't hide from myself anymore. That's how I approach it. So yeah, man, that's I went on for a bit there, but that may be somewhat of a distillation of how I orient these days.
Yeah, you've left me with a lot to unpack there, Sam. I found one bit you said really interesting, and it was the intention behind when you said you're going to face it, from like the advice from Jordan Peterson, and how you was facing your fears, but there was still the anxiety there. And I've had very like similar situations where like I've gone and exposed myself, but it's kind of like I'm putting on a front. It's like I'm putting on a mask and exposing it through someone who's not me. It's like this persona that I've created. And then I had social anxiety today, so there was a girl at work and she started speaking to me, and it just like came out of nowhere. And every time I think I've overcome the social anxiety, it's like it creeps up on me and pops out, and it's like, now I'm still here. And the idea of trying to overcome it is in itself creating a shame around that. So how would you recommend people
Yeah.
do the exposure? How do you recommend people face the anxiety in a way without having the shame?
Yeah, wow. Well, for sure, man. Like, it's gonna come up, right? And that sort of feeds into what I was speaking about before, with the willingness to meet that social angst with as much love as you can. So you ask, how can people meet it without the shame? I would say I would question what it is, like what identity it is that you're trying to uphold in that situation with a girl. And I know as young men, right? Like, I don't know what your audience is at the moment, but if there's a lot of young men, I think you mentioned actually in the email, right? So we consume a lot of content on YouTube. We have access to so much at our fingertips, and the byproduct of that is that we consume a whole bunch of subconscious beliefs about how a man should be and how we should be interrelating with other people, right? And if we're not meeting that standard, then we are basically, that feeds into the shame cycle, right? So as an example, I don't know if your viewers would watch someone like Andrew Tate, but maybe they've seen like someone similar to that who holds energy in their self-explorations and stuff like that. So then, okay, and then at some point, our identity felt inadequate, and then we took on these subconscious beliefs from influencers, or maybe even from books or people around us, that and especially like familial conditioning, like that this is how a man needs to be, right? So, and if we're not meeting that, so then we go into a social situation and we're engaging with a girl, like a cutie 10 out of 10, or just kidding. But like, you know, and then we have this perception of how we need to be. Like, oh, I saw Andrew Tate, you know, he's got a Bugatti and he goes up to chicks and he's like, you know, just gets their number in 2 seconds and then is having sex with them that night or something. But like, you know, small things like this, and that's an exaggeration, but we accrue these beliefs of what that looks like. And what we do is we further that split of from our shadow to loving what is actually arising right now in that process. Right? So if we can just, I think in that situation, if we can just slow down and just be with what is actually here, and just notice if you can do that. And I understand with social anxiety, this is really tricky, right? Because Alex, you described being in a situation with a girl, and then she, you know, like say you hear the advice like this, and then you're speaking with a girl. That shame and that social angst is still probably going to get triggered. And then in that moment, that is when you're going to be tested on how much you can accept what is. And the way that we accept what is we start to get a little bit of leverage on our experience by being with those sensations fully, being with that social angst, and just saying, okay, and a good mantra could be, this is what is happening. This is what's happening, right? It couldn't be any other way right now. And for me to wish it was another way is to reject experience, is to deny what is, right? So then what, but I understand that even that, hearing that, it can feel nice and we can have a bit of an epiphany high from hearing something like this. But then when we go into the social situation and we're confronted with that again, all of the coping strategies are in full force. So in that case, my invitation would be to, well, first of all, have a sense of deep curiosity with what's arising in your experience. So shifting from a sense of, oh no, here it is again, to like, oh, like, what is this? You know, what could this be? And if you can infuse warmth into that curiosity as well, with like a sense of that, what I mentioned before, like an inner child model of like, hey, here's a wounded child that's showing, it's presenting itself, and it keeps it, you know, it's been here before and I've experienced something like this before. Okay, let me just meet you. Like, I want to understand you. I want to know you. Right? And then from that place of curiosity and being mindful of the fact that we're orienting toward just accepting what's here, we can then maybe put our attention into the bodily sensations that are arising. If that's one tip I would recommend people, is to get more acquainted with their bodily sensations in social anxiety. So maybe there's like, you might notice a tightening of the throat, or like a buzzing, energetic discomfort, or like a really squirmy sense of, and having thoughts on rapid fire, like, what are they thinking of me? Am I making too much eye contact? How am I looking, right? And sometimes these things can be pre-verbal, so there's not even an overt thought occurring, but if you can just attune your attention into the bodily sensations and forego the need to analyze and just bring that sense of loving, curious acceptance, then you're going to be in a much better position to get leverage on exploring the beliefs that you have about yourself in that situation. So if you can build that capacity to be with like the most uncomfortable sensations. And I said in a previous video, like, what that might look like is you're like, okay, I'm going to attune to sensations. And I'll be with a sensation, then it's going to be like, oh, it's uncomfortable. And then you can be with it for like 5 seconds, and then you'll go into a coping strategy or something. But the more that you keep doing that, the more that you keep building capacity to be with those sensations, being with what is, not with how you think you should be, then, and softening into those sensations, that capacity will grow. And I'm telling you, it will grow to the point where like don't just hear it like, oh, okay, I'll be with it for 5 seconds and I'll go into a coping strategy. No, you have the capacity to continue to grow that capacity, and you will. So don't land on that 5 second thing as like as a way to keep yourself in what's familiar. Right. So keep building that capacity, and then, then you might question the beliefs around and I'll let you butt in here after this bit, because once you've built the capacity to be with your experience, then you can get more leverage on the beliefs themselves. Like, oh, okay, like I want to, and you might do this after the fact. You might do this following the social encounter when you have a little bit more space or something. If it's too hard to do in the moment, I understand it's not always easy. And then to, like, question, what identity was I trying to maintain there other than accepting what I am? Like, oh, okay, I was talking to this chick and I wanted her to see me as Andrew Tate, or I wanted her to see me as super confident, or I wanted her to see me as, being having unshakable confidence, right? Which is understandable, but for me, like, I don't really care about that anymore. Like, I care about what's true. Like, I prioritize truth over what a girl thinks of me, even if she's quote unquote cute or whatever. Like, I care about what actually is happening and cultivating a deep sense of internal self-love for ourselves and authenticity. Because once we're attuned to that, then we're going to attract the people who actually love us for who we are, not just like some one night stand or something that with a shallow girl that we're trying to attract through, like, who cares about that? It might be nice to explore sexuality and like get a girl and use all these like, courting mechanisms of like, trying to be popular or whatever, or look popular, look confident. But like for me, I think just bringing it back into what's actually happening is where the money's at. And because that's, if we attune to that, and this is just my opinion, like, so maybe, I don't know, like, I honestly don't know, but like, that seems like a much better reality to me to live in, rather than trying to maintain a false image of ourselves and shaming ourselves when we're not meeting that standard. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, for sure, Sam. And I find it very difficult. And I think people who experience social anxiety to, like, when you were saying to feel your body, I think when you're in that experience, it's so easy to get caught up in your head and to be so, like, sometimes you can freeze and like you have no sensations because you're so caught in the thought loops. You're so stuck in a perpetual state of thought that it's very hard to like get in touch with how you're feeling. So how would you recommend like a practical way of someone feels more embodied? Because I think people are so disconnected from how their body's feeling that they're completely unaware of like the sensation of your heart rate going is inflicted by that pretty girl or that person. Like they're so away from their body that they're not even sure that that's happening.
Yeah, man. And I just want to say, like, I think that, the fact that you have, I'll just turn this on you for 1 second, but the fact that you have social anxiety and you're doing a podcast like this and reaching out, I think that's just so amazing, man. So kudos to you. But also, yeah, so,
Thanks,
okay,
Sam.
if you're
Appreciate
freezing
that,
and you're numbing out and you're disconnected from your body, yeah, you're good, man. If you're freezing and you're numbing out and you're dissociated from your body, then in that case, yeah, so what can you do in that situation? Well, you have to start small. Just start where you're at, right? Start where you're at. If you can't be with your body in a social encounter, one of the hallmarks of something like social angst is to then beat yourself up, right? If you're not meeting a certain standard. But like, I think the more that we can just come with a beginner's mindset in any given moment, right? So, oh, okay, I didn't, in that situation, I couldn't be with my bodily sensations. And then we're like, oh, but man, I should be able to do that by now. Like, I've done all the spiritual work or whatever. It's like, well, no, that's just not where you were at that moment. So let's start again. Let's just refresh. Okay. Now, practically speaking, when you're in that moment and all those mechanisms are going off, what we can do is create safety and experience. And we know now from literature, I think I heard people like Tara Brach talk about this, but there's many ways to create safety in your experience, because if you're dissociating, right, where it can feel like things are getting foggy in your experience, it feels like there's a pane of glass in front of you, you're sort of numbed out, you're sort of like flighty, something just feels off. If that's happening, so that is a pretty typical of a freeze response, where we're coming up against emotional contractions and densities in the body that our nervous system is interpreted to be too overwhelming. So as a coping strategy, what our bodies are actually designed to do, so this isn't a like pathological thing or like, oh no, I'm dissociating. It's designed to do this, and it's keeping you safe in a way. It we don't want to feel the pain, so our body flips a whole neural circuit where we then go into dorsal vagal, it's called, where we're in basically like survival stress. Our nervous system's interpreting threat, and right, so we're numbing out, right? So the question is, what do we then do in that situation? First of all, we just, as best as we can, we just accept. We like, okay, again, this mantra, this is what is happening, can be really helpful, right? And you can see how disarming that is. It's like, okay, it couldn't be any other way. And if we're still struggling with that a lot, then there's probably that's an indicator there's a certain belief or set of beliefs there that we should be a certain way, which might take some emotional investigation and feeling into the body and meeting these energies where they are. But yeah, so just accept this is what is happening, and then we can then move into creating safety in the body. And creating safety might look like there's a multitude of things, but for one, just taking a break, giving yourself permission to get away from that situation if you need to. A lot of the time we can have a belief as people with social anxiety, maybe with people-pleasing tendencies, that we need to make everyone happy or something like that. Or if we leave the situation, we'll look weird, which will then, draw more eyes onto us. But I think the more that we can attune to what's authentic for us and take a break and just maybe excuse yourself to the bathroom or something like that if you need to, go ahead and do that. Don't be afraid to do that. Or other ways to create safety practically in the moment might be just to take a deep breath, like into your gut, and then exhale, and just feel on the exhale the weight of your body on the ground. Feel like the weight of your feet on the ground, sinking into the earth. And notice that sense of warmth moving through your body, right? Or other ways that you can do it are, like imagining a guardian angel or something, right? Which might sound a bit gimmicky, cringy even, especially if we have a deep spiritual practice or we've done psychedelics and these sorts of things. Like, calling upon a guardian or something like that might seem a bit weird. But, think of people in your life who have had energies that you've just felt deeply loving energy from, that you unconditional love. You can just be exactly as you are without changing, right? And just imagine them like putting their hand on your shoulder when you're feeling that, right? If you're really overwhelmed, and just see if you can feel like, yeah, I'm supported here. And if it's not anyone in your life that you can think of, if you just had so much abuse or anything like that and you just don't have anyone, maybe like a pet, like a dog or something. Just reference that experience and you might just imagine that dog with you or something like that, right? And just know that you're okay through that experience of being with that dog, that you are loved, that you are unconditionally loved. Or a client of mine I know puts his hand on his gut and just rests his hand on the gut and just see if you can connect to that sense of warmth of like, I've got this, I'm loved. Like it's not so much a cognitive thing. It's not so much a cognitive practice of creating safety. We're looking for the felt experience of warmth, of no matter what's happening, like I can let that then infuse into my nervous system, right? And there's another thing I want to add. Lastly, I could speak more and more about this, and there's so many nuances I know, and I'm sure there's a few questions you might have about this because I understand that these energies, don't get me wrong, like I've been in the field, like I've experienced these things very directly. We can even hear things like this and we then are still thrust out into social situations and it still gets so ungrounding. So again, it just comes back to building capacity, attuning to what's actually happening, what's authentic for you, and continuing to then investigate the beliefs and keeping it, that's quite a simple way to put it. But I'll also add mindset does matter as well, right? Because if we're going into a social situation, right, if we're necessitated to go into a social situation, if we're going in with the view, if we're going in with the paradigm of, oh no, here's another social encounter that I've got to contend with, and here's this big final boss battle that I've got to fight, you know, like like I'm coming up against Kratos or something. If I'm coming up against right, but that's our view that we're orienting to the social situation with. Our mind is then going to be looking for reasons why that is the case, right? So if our mindset is I'm coming up against a big demon, then we're going to be looking for all of the demons in experience. But if we can orient from a place, and this might, you know, our insight will deepen with this, I think, the more that you practice spiritual practices or have insight, especially if you've had like a psychedelic experience, you've tasted something like an expansive state of consciousness, you know, and you have a direct reference point that you don't have to be bound by limitation. You aren't bound by your stories. So if we can orient toward that experiential understanding that, okay, maybe this social encounter, maybe these people are divine beings and they are, you know, and I can relate to them with authenticity, and I don't need to be bound by social angst. I might get socially anxious, but I might not. I might have a really wonderful encounter with these people, or, you know, like this girl or whatever, you know, like just to draw upon that reference, this girl may not be like as scary as I thought she is. Maybe I can actually just interrelate with her in a way that's, you know, really beautiful and transpires in a really wonderful conversation, right? And then if that, and through that lens, if we're orienting through that lens, it's a much more disarming way to engage rather than like we're coming up against something like, you know, again, boss battle, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing I keep hearing you refer to, Sam, is like the beliefs and the narratives we tell ourselves. So is it right that like we perceive our perception shapes our reality, the way we think and the way we think we perceive the world, then we kind of manifest them actions through them perceptions. So how do people get like super clear on that belief? Is social anxiety coming from an inherent belief of I'm not enough or I'm not good enough? Is that what's causing it, or is it something else?
Yeah. Yeah, a really good way to reference that I've found is when you're feeling social anxiety, like especially, so this can be really useful after the encounter, yeah? So I'm really big on somatic inquiry, and this is what I facilitate people with, and this is a lot of what I do with people, because somatic meaning of the body, of the soma, so connecting to the body. So basically bodily sensations. So you'll notice after a social encounter, if you've been particularly triggered, there's a lot of like pain in experience, yeah? So there's like, you might feel just this blanketing sense of angst, or this like tightening in the throat, or this like tightening of the gut, especially solar plexus area. Yeah, just pain in general, yeah? So if you can meet that energy, and that when you're feeling that, rather than distraction, this is the key. Our mind will want to distract itself, and there's probably going to be a lot of momentum to want to do that. And distraction might look like, you know, wanting to go on Netflix when you get home from work, if you were like socially anxious in the workplace. It might look like playing video games like it was for me. It might look like, you know, like masturbation. It might look like listening to audiobooks, or like podcasts, or like or spiritual videos. That's a big one. That can be a distraction, right? So rather than actually attuning to those bodily sensations with curiosity, what we then do is we're looking to numb out to our pain by doing something. So doing something other than being with what is. So if we can attune our attention to the bodily sensations with that sense of loving curiosity, like, wow, look at this, you know, and then to feel them out directly, right? It's almost as if that these bodily sensations have a view of the world inherent to themselves. And in a way. So like they see the world through it's almost like the emotion sees the world through a different lens. And this takes getting your ego out of the way. But when you're feeling that intense pain, you can then be like, okay, so what is this? If you feel the emotion, you slow down, you might create a bit of safety in your experience. If you're unable to do this, you can reference what we talked about before, like, how can I create safety in my experience? And then just put your attention right into that bodily sensation and breathe into it. And you might be able to be with it for like 3 seconds, and then you bottom out, and then you want to, that tendency is like, I can't handle this. And then you just say, okay, maybe I can handle this. And you bring attention into that sensation. And then you might just dialogue with it. Have a basic dialogue. You know, like a really good inquiry could be, how do you view the world? You might even visualize that social situation again that you're being triggered in, to actually exacerbate that sensation that you're experiencing, because you actually want to be curious with it. So you're bringing that attitude of like, okay, like, wow, you got really activated there, and I want to actually bring you forward so I can see you more clearly. And you just get curious, like, what are you trying to do for me? What do you believe about yourself? And you might notice that there's a lot of, especially with social anxiety, as you let the emotion tell you, so don't fabricate this from something that you've heard. You actually have to be authentically connecting to the emotion and exploring it with curiosity in your own experience. But you might question, so okay, like what are the beliefs? How do you see the world? And then the emotion might tell you. It'll say something like, oh man, I can't show this emotion to them or like, man, I just suck. I suck at social encounters. Or like, it's my fault that I'm feeling this way. Right? So that's the internalized shame, or something like that, right? And yeah, just meeting that with a lot of love. And as you explore that out, it's like it's almost like you're imagining this part of you has been pushed away and locked away in a closet for your whole life, and it keeps getting rejected and resisted and pushed away. But now you're just like, you're almost inhabiting that loving father energy that we all wish we had, right? Just like a really loving presence coming in, and just unconditional love. Like, you can be here. Like, I'm going to open up this cabinet door, and everyone has the capacity to do this, but I'm going to open up this cabinet door, and I'm going to welcome you out, and I want to hear everything you have to say. I just want to love you so deeply and give you so much presence that you never received. Everyone cross-generationally has said that you're too ugly, you're too broken, but I'm going to be the one who's going to open that door and just explore what it is how you're seeing the world. Yeah. So that's how I would examine that.
You've really just shifted the way I'm perceiving my social anxiety, Sam, and I just want to summarize that for people, just to give them like a reinforcement of how important that was. So kind of what you alluded to there was like seeing your emotions and the sensations going on in your body as kind of detaching away from them and seeing them as like personalities, and they've got their own character, and all you're doing is being inquisitive and like stepping away and being like kind of the father figure, being a parent for them, and like showing them compassion and love, and you're really allowing them to like come with what they've got instead of suppressing and hiding it. You're allowing them to just be in their nature. And that by itself, you showing love and compassion, is letting go of the shame, is letting go of the identification of I need to be someone else, and it's just allowing what is happening to happen. I think that's what I got from that, Sam, and I think that's really important for people to like try and embody and instill in their life, because like if not, you're just going to be perpetually beating yourself up all the time, suppressing these things, and they're constantly going to be coming out in your actions and your behaviors, and you're going to become like really disconnected your whole life. So I think that was just really powerful for people, and I would recommend people to go re-listen to that, because I think there was a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and here's the thing, man. So I suspect a lot of your audience is also, they're spiritual seekers of some degree, like you're the traveling psychonaut. So, and right, so what we're doing with these spiritual practices is we're opening up our capacity. We're opening up our energetic capacity. Basically, our sensitivity is increasing. So that's going to continue to increase. So the call to action would be that, okay, well, let's just meet these energies and stop hiding from them now. Because they're going to keep coming, right? So we might as well be curious and orient to them in a loving way, rather than trying to transcend and get away from experience. Because, I would suggest orienting to these sensations in a way that, what if I had to be with this for the rest of my life, right? Can you see how that shifts the paradigm from I'm going to transcend this and get rid of this to I'm going to be with what's here no matter what? And that all that's left, the only thing that will work is the love. Right? But I also want to emphasize as well that we're not playing into a victim identity here as well by any means. If you've experienced through true spiritual insight that you are infinite expanse and love, almost like orient to that as your baseline, right? So that we're not playing into this perpetual cycle of healing trauma, right? Because that can be another fixation, actually. Is like if we're constantly looking for things that are wrong with us to then orient our attention to then love and to release, then all we're going to be looking for, again with that same orientation before of like looking for the final boss, we're going to be looking for the thing that's wrong with us to then fix. And that can get co-opted by the ego to be this thing where we're constantly trying to transmute and feel better. But then we're still looking for the problem. We're still constantly looking to be putting out fires. So if you can get a real visceral sense of your true nature and bring that sense of curiosity of like, I am unbound consciousness. I am the true self. I'm not bound by limitation. And that's not a cognitive thing. Again, we have to really feel that in our bones as we bring it into these social situations, and then basically meet whatever is saying otherwise with such deep love and with softness, then that will help transmute at a more fundamental level, I think, and to actually bring a reality into existence that isn't bound by limitation and smallness. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
Escaping the traps of that limitation, I think, is so important. And when you can realize the true nature of expansiveness, that you are your limitless potential, that gives you that sense of courage to tackle things. So obviously you've been meditating for a long time, Sam, and you said, like, alluded to psychedelics as well. Would you recommend people start with meditation to feel this like expansive nature? How can they tap into that? Because if you're trapped in the confines of your own logic and your intellect, like, it's very hard to like even comprehend or experience something like that because you're so disconnected from what is consciousness. Yeah. So how would you recommend people tap into that limitless potential?
Dude, you ask such good questions, man. I feel you're like right with me here. Yeah, it's good. It's such a good question because like we can come from this view of like, I've been doing a spiritual practice for so long, and people can be intimidated by that. It's like you can be really, you can hear these pointers or something like that and then be like, well, shit, what do you want me to go do? Sit in a meditation cave for the next 10 years and then I'll finally be able to get a grasp on this. So I would again just emphasize, like, start where you're at, start where you're at. So even if you have no meditation experience, if you have no interest in consciousness or orienting in a different way, then okay, that's where you are right now. Don't worry. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Like, the only thing, and I understand, like, when you're suffering a lot, when you're in deep despair, you can be very impressioned by these sorts of things, and that can then feed into a cycle of lack. So to answer your question, I would suggest, what is one step in the direction of something less bound by limitation? What does that look like for you? Whether it's, downloading, and what's realistic for you? Is that downloading a Headspace app, a basic meditation app, and then, like doing a 5-minute meditation or even 3-minute meditation per day? Or is that being, for wherever your orientation is? I would want to meet people where they're at, or is it going on an ayahuasca retreat? Or is it having a psychedelic experience in a safe way, not in a recreational way, if we're actually interested in healing and transcendence, right? Or, for me, that's been meditation. Like I started meditating in my room when I was feeling deep social angst. And I did 5 minutes a day, I did 20 minutes a day, I did 30 minutes a day. Um, but I know there's really good models out there as well. Like things like internal family systems has a good appreciation for the true self, from what I understand. I'm not very well steeped in it. And I do things like somatic inquiry with people where I would help guide them to maybe more of an expansive state of consciousness and then work from there. But you could seek help for these, and don't be afraid to seek help. So internal family systems, looking for people who do that online or through me or whatever works for you, to meet these energies. That's a really good way to start. And people with social anxiety don't want to seek help, I know, because again, there's a lot of shame, and we're worried about what even like the therapist might think of us sometimes if you're particularly socially anxious. But again, just start where you're at. If you can't see that, then I would recommend, maybe like starting with a little bit of meditation here and there, and especially attuning to your bodily sensations. Starting with like a breath meditation, and then just maybe auditing your experience with like, okay, what am I feeling? What does it feel like to be anxious? And then slowly just work your way up to where, something like self-inquiry might become apparent to you. Like, who am I? Who am I? Like, what is this? Where I can then start feeling into a sense of more of an expansive state of consciousness that isn't bound by limitation. So yeah, TLDR would be to start where you're at and go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, that meditation I think can be it can be a really good a pad for you to set off on to really start that inquiry. I was interested in your own experience, Sam, and how as you've naturally got a better meditator and you've been meditating for years and years, how has that correlated with you having a better relationship with your social anxiety? As the narrative around your social anxiety changed, has the meditation enhanced that? How has the meditation deepened your understanding of yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Oh man, like it's deepened my way of how I understand myself in so many ways. It's hard to describe that, but it's specifically with social anxiety. I think the way, if I were to put it briefly, it's deepened my capacity to be with what is. I used to think like meditation was going to lead to this deep state of transcendence where I was going to be blast off into another realm where social anxiety was completely obliterated. But and that wasn't even a conscious agenda. I think that was just totally subconscious to me. I was just hoping that, something would just shift. Some fundamental paradigm would just totally shift, and then that would eradicate all of the trauma to do with social anxiety. But what's actually transpired for me is I still experience what could be called social anxiety, although you don't even need to call it that. I still experience what may be called, like uncomfortable emotions, painful emotions in social experiences. But I now have the insight to recognize that that is just an energy. It's just a free-flowing energy, just like wind blowing in the air. That isn't me. That is, and like how my social anxious mind used to contend of it as it's like, and then self-blame and attack itself. It's just an energy. And so what meditation's shown me is that it's illuminated that it basically, all of these things are just energies. Everything in experience, from the tightness in the gut to the sweaty palms, like whatever socially anxious thing arises. But it's just, again, like how much can I then just cut blaming other people, distancing myself from what is by distracting myself through whatever means. And there's something to be said about healthy distraction, don't get me wrong. And just attuning to the sensations. And meditation has shown me that I have the capacity to do that with any experience, basically. And if I get triggered, if something gets really uncomfortable and I get thrown for a loop by it, then okay, can I just orient to what's here? This is what's happening. and not get caught in rumination about past, future, and present. Oh, and that's probably one of the other big things is the capacity to not be bound in time, to not be caught up in past, present, and future. Like, there's such a mental acuity to be able to see like foreboding thoughts or like worrying about how a social situation is going to go. You know, like even before a podcast like this, Alex, you know, like, there could be thoughts about like, oh, what am I going to say? Or, you know, like, am I qualified enough? Or like, you know, all of these things can arise as thoughts, but just the capacity to then see those thoughts as thoughts and like, and sort of like just attune to what's actually happening and then just let go into the unknown and just let the unknown be the guide. That is a huge relief because so much of social anxiety is rumination. It's like worrying about what I should say next, how I should, you know, like how I could have said something better, how I'm worrying about the social situation. But meditation has just shown me like it by attuning to and knowing what thought is, to just come back to the immediate experience more and more, and then just trust in life that I have everything that I need. So I can just let go. I don't need to think about what I'm going to say next anymore. Like I can just attune to be so present in the immediate experience that as I'm speaking with somebody, I'm not thinking in my mind anymore, like, oh, okay, so she said this, and now I'm going to pull back, and then I'm going to think about this and sort of dissociate myself from the experience. It's more like, okay, I'm just going to listen with my whole body as a receptive sense organ that is fully here, it's fully present, I'm not thinking, and if thoughts arise, so be it. I'm not going to reject them. But, you know, and then just acting from that place of spontaneity, not bound up in thought anymore. And that is just such a huge, it's probably hard to like describe. Even as I say that, I'm like, yeah, shit, that used to be a really big problem for me, like ruminating and worrying. But now it's just like more of a trust in the surrender of being in the social situation and letting it take me. And, you know, it's still not perfect. Like sometimes I like feel contracted and I have these beliefs and sensations that arise, but then it's just about meeting them again. It's okay, this is where I'm at. This is what's happening. Like I still get triggered, you know, like who gives a shit? That's just what's up. That's the reality. So can I just attune to that with love and acceptance and faith and move into the unknown through that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Sam. I kind of want to extrapolate the metaphor of social anxiety to kind of like your whole life, and that the way you was describing letting go and trusting like things are going to work. How do you balance the letting go and there's having like a plan and trying to act on that plan? Because this is something I struggle with, and I think it causes me anxiety because it ruins my self-esteem and I perceive myself differently, which affects the way I act in social situations. So how do you act with the willingness to let go while still holding yourself to accountability, to still holding yourself to a plan? And it's really hard to like not control things too much, but also you don't want to be too floaty.
Yeah. Fuck, good question, man. Yeah, I know. And this is something I've felt into. So I'm not going to say that I've mastered it or I'm like the pro at this. So, but I'll share my perspective on it. Yeah, so there's a real attunement, right? So for me previously, I looked up to a lot of people like Joe Rogan and like Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson and stuff would be like, set a goal, have a high aim in your life. And like, you know, and then you're coming up against spiritual teachings and shit that basically just say, just surrender it all to God, man. Just let go into the unknown. And you're like, well, shit, which one do I do? Like, how do I navigate this? And for me, what that experience has been like lately is more of a feminine energy where it's giving into surrender and trusting the moment and leaning on the chest of God in a way, to just show me and to give me, you know, and there's a lot of biblical stuff around this, or like not even biblical, but just like new wisdom teachings that say if you just give it over, just surrender yourself, everything is perfectly managed. Like I've heard Angelo DeLulo quote a teacher who says, everything is perfectly managed in the unborn. Say that again. Everything is perfectly managed in the unborn. Right? But then we're still confronted with the relative needs and realities of being a young man, or like whatever your audience is, and we have to then, meet everyday life with, like momentum. We have to look after ourselves. We have to take care of responsibilities. Yeah, man. So for what's coming forward for me with that, and again, this is like emergent too. So I'm not a pro at this, but 99.99% of our thoughts are rumination and like second guessing and doubt, and this is felt as like a deep emotional contraction. Yeah, it's not just like a thought. I would add on to that we can also have this deep sense of neural conditioning that's like baked into our nervous system that is basically saying things like you were not enough, and we can have a lot of thoughts that come with that as well, that are feeding off that energy, basically, like, oh man, I really am just a piece of shit, or whatever it says. But so it's like this dance of welcoming and attuning to sensations, and just allowing them without needing to react to them, but then orienting to your deepest true self, orienting away from that like self-limiting story that is so familiar to us, right? Because this might be something that we've been coming up against over and over again, that like, man, I'm just not enough. Like, I just can't get this. Like, every time I try at something, I fail. Like, right, whatever the narrative is. And then just attuning to your deepest instinct over and over again and being like, okay, wow, look at that thought. Look how familiar it is. Look how it wants to make itself real. Look how it really wants to make itself a reality. And then just like softening into source, softening away from that through, meditation, or like even just being in nature, man. Just like, you don't even need to be a deep meditator, but just find time to be in silence. Find time to be in like a garden. Just sit in your garden, sit in a forest, and then just like, don't distract yourself and just listen. Like, what is it that I want to do? What is the next step that I can take to a life that I want to live out? And don't bullshit yourself on the life it is that you want to live out, because your body will then fight back, and you're into the path of least resistance will then kick in strong. So, like, what is it I actually want? And it might not look like what everyone wants for me, or like what I thought that I wanted, right? So you're almost like praying here. It's like, what do I actually want? And I'm not going to kid myself anymore. And then just take the next step. Just let your intuition take that next step for you, right? So that act of asking what it is that you want is the goal setting, is the process of attuning to, the more relative needs and stuff. And I don't know, like, see, this is something that's still unfolding for me. So again, but then just moving in that direction. Just keep moving in that direction. And then the faith and the wisdom traditions would say that, again, everything is perfectly managed when you do that, when you give it over to God. And just be mindful, and you can laugh at all the rumination thoughts that arise, like, oh, you're not good enough to do this. But you're attuning to something much more unbound by that. And that's why there's something so powerful about religious pointings. It's like, just give it over to God. Just trust. And then that will be managed. Right? So yeah, you could extrapolate that to social anxiety as well, like in the way that if you attune to something that's so perfect and so untouched by, if you attune to that, then that burns up social anxiety, because like your social anxiety is a lot of shame. So anything that isn't God is burnt up, through the love of awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to feel that intuition is the voice of God, and we live in a world where it's so easy to intellectualize, like, especially for people like me and you, Sam, like, we sit there and read all the religious texts and read all these spiritual books, proper get stuck in your head, and that takes you away from the intuition. And that intuition is like a whisper. It's the voice of God, like, kind of guiding you to where you want to go. And it's just about getting quiet
Yeah.
enough and getting still enough to listen to what is truly you, where you truly want to go. And unfortunately, or fortunately, like, we live in a world where there is distractions everywhere. There's chances to constantly be on social media, constantly be watching porn or eating junk food, and it's just one distraction after another, and all the time you're just training the habit of your mind to not listen to that intuition, to like to get stuck in logic. And I think that's where maybe the faith really does come into hand, like having faith in your own ability to know what's happening. Like, our mind has been evolving for billions of years to know what to choose and where to take us, and that intuition has been, it's an evolutionary tool, and to not listen to that is a real shame of our modern world.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's so we got our little like pacifier of distraction just waiting at our fingertips. Like like we feel a little bit of uncomfortable energy, and it's like we'll suck on the pacifier, right? And then porn, video games, YouTube, like whatever. It's right, or phone, man. Like my God, this piece of shit phone that it's just like it's so delicious. It's just like I'm right here, ready to take you. And obviously there's like utility in these things, and it's not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like we can distract ourselves skillfully sometimes, like when life is just beating us up. But take a small break and just like a bit of self love and self care. But your intuition knows when you're bullshitting yourself with that. It's like, dude, you don't have to do this. And yeah, just being still, like you said, man, it's like so well put. Like we know we have within us the wisdom to know what to do. Like we don't have to like play small anymore. Like, and if we do play small, then we just meet that with a sense of curiosity. And like, what is it getting for me to play small? Like, wow, I'm attuning to my intuition. And then there's this real strong pull to want to like be like, box myself into this small little identity of who and what I am. Like, what is that getting for me? And then we're like, okay, wow, I'm seeing that if I were to really step into something bigger, then man, I would have to confront the responsibilities of life. Man, then I would have to actually go out and like do something that is like challenging in life, right? So there's like a fierce love to our intuition. It wants you to enact and do something of service. And it seems to have this wonderful capacity to be deeply intelligent and loving. And it's like, it's almost like a bus driving, right? You're in traffic and there's a big traffic jam. It's almost like intuition is the bus, and it can see like 15 cars ahead of us. And we're like, and then we're choosing to be in the smallness of being in a car. And we're like, oh, but yeah, but this is familiar. But intuition is like, if we just trust, and yeah, we'll be taken care of, because the bus can see much further ahead anyway than we can even imagine. Yeah.
It's just allowing yourself to like trust that intuition, and I think that's a process that comes from a lot of deprogramming from society and like parent expectations and your own expectations of who you are. Like, it's just a process of unraveling all these and slowly allowing yourself to be your
Yeah.
true authentic self.
Yeah, and like, but you can also decide that right now you don't have to, because like, right, so what I just want to add this, because this is something that's been coming up for me very recently, is we can then use that as a way to then keep ourselves small. Is like, if we're up against something, if we're up against like the Matrix, like Andrew Tate, like we're up against the Matrix or something, then we've got something to contend with, and then that actually paradoxically keeps us in the smallness. But what if we just inhabited that love? Like, what if I didn't need to be bound by my parents' limitations and I could just shift into that right now? Then what would be the next step? And then you just build confidence through that. Like, and that's not to deny the relative world. Like, people are in really challenging situations with like abusive families and stuff. And it's just like starting where you're at, right? But it's like, it's people have been burned. This is where like faith comes in. There's people in previous realities, so earlier in like you hear these stories of like religious people who tried to unify religions under one collective consciousness orientation or something. And these people were fucking burnt at the stake for that. And even when they were being burnt at the stake, they were still uncompromising in their truth, you know? And it's like, shit, like, even if I'm in the most horrible situation in my life, I can still orient to that. I can still trust and have faith in God, or whatever you conceive of it of. If you don't like God, like maybe like the astral plane, or like whatever it is, like whatever actually resonates for you. And then and just act from that place, you know? And just take that next step and just trust and just trust and just trust. And okay, I've jumped off the bandwagon a little bit. Okay, I'm going to come back. And I trust, you know? And then that momentum will just take a life form of its own, so that you're then unified with God in every moment, every action that you take, I guess, you know? Yeah.
Before we finish, Sam, I want to ask you like a meaty question. Who is God to you? Like, what is God?
Man. Yeah. Oh shit. God is felt. God is not a intellectual thought. God is it's a presence, I think. It's a spiritual presence that isn't bound by time. It isn't bound by smallness. It isn't bound by limitation. It's something that is right here. It's within all of us, right here, right now. Even the thought of it's not here is God in drag, dressed up in drag is doubt. Yeah, it's everything, and it's not bound by anything. That's how I conceive of God. It's a felt thing, not cognitive. So the mind can then take that as like as a intellectual thing of like, okay, God is unbound, and then we have that as a thought, but then we're not feeling the presence of it in experience. So, yeah.
Ideal, Sam. I really appreciate your time, mate. That was such an enlightening conversation for me. I feel like I got a lot to process, and it was kind of like a selfish conversation because I was like trying to poke you for my own problems. But honestly, Sam, I appreciate everything you do, mate. I think your work around social anxiety and everything you're doing on YouTube, it's going to help a lot of people, and I'm looking forward to watching you grow, continue helping people. And yeah, I just really appreciate you taking the time to hop on this call.
Dude, yeah, and so much love for you, man. Like even the fact that, yeah, I said it before, but the fact that you're doing this podcast and these are things that you're coming up against, yeah, you're not bound by it, and you know that, like, and you're already taking steps to actualize a higher expression. So I just want to encourage you, man, and I just thank you so much for doing what you're doing. You know, keep crushing it, brother, and happy to be here.
Beautiful, Sam. I hope to get you on the podcast in a later date, and thank you very much for coming on, mate.
Yeah, thank you, man.